Yo guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Rafi Chess. Today we're doing 10 tips for beginners. So we're going to do 3 tips for the opening, 3 for the middle game, 3 for the end game, and a bonus tip at the end. So stay tuned for that. The first tip, guys, is to only push pawns that help you develop pieces. For example, you might want to do something like e4, because e4 lets you bring out the bishop and it also controls the center. So you could do maybe c4 as well, you could do d4, but I would say to stick with e4 because it's the simplest one. It does involve tactics as well more often than d4. So you could do something like bring out your knight, and then if they do the same on the next move, you could play something like bishop b5, or you could play bishop c4. Again, you might want to do something like d3, because d3 will let you develop your dark squared bishop. But you don't want to do something like h3, because h3, it doesn't help you develop a piece. And in the start of the game, you have all these pieces on the back rank, and you want to try bring them out into the game so that you can use it to win material. The second tip is to castle as soon as possible. Once black brings out their bishop, castle, because it brings your king to safety, and it also develops the rook, which you can then put on the e file, and this is good to prepare for when you play d4. The second tip is to only start attacking once you've developed all of your pieces. For example, if white does something like d6, you don't want to do knight g5. The reason being that although you are attacking the f7 pawn, you have all these pieces that still are not developed. So it's better to just do something like knight c3. When black castles, maybe you develop your bishop, and let's say they also develop their bishop, then you can try move it a second time to attack your opponent. For example, knight d5 here would be a good move, because let's say your opponent does something like h6 to attack your bishop, you can simply capture the knight, and then when they capture back, you can win a pawn. But if you haven't developed all your pieces yet, it wouldn't make sense to do something like knight d5. For example, if this bishop was still on c1, it wouldn't make sense to do something like knight d5, because then your opponent could just choose to capture it if they want. This is because you haven't developed your bishop yet. The next tip is to not push pawns in front of your king. The reason being that, let's say you do something like h3 to kick out this bishop, because like you're afraid of knight d5 happening or something, so the bishop goes back. It would actually be a bad idea to play something like g5, because when you push the pawns like this, you are actually weakening the king's position, because every time you push a pawn, it can never go backwards. So when you push g5, it weakens this knight and the h pawn as well. Whereas if you kept it on g7, it would still protect the knight and it would still protect this pawn. So in this position, white could actually just sack the knight. Pawn captures and bishop captures, and even though they're down an entire piece, the fact that your king is now so open, white actually gets enough counterplay to the point where they're actually winning in this position, despite being an entire piece down. Another tip is to always try look out for tactics. Let's say, for example, in this position, white played d4 and you captured it as black. Then they play bishop g5. You need to be aware that when there's a pin on your piece, like such as this, like maybe it could be a rook, like the queen and the knight is on the same line and then there's a rook, you need to be aware that a pawn push might lose you the piece, because if black does something like bishop c5, white can play e5, and this is winning because if black moves their knight, then they lose the queen. The third tip for middle games is to practice puzzles. The reason being that if you do puzzles, you'll be able to look out for tactics, you'll be able to use them against your opponent, and it will really help you get a lot better at the game. For example, in this position, a lot of players might do something like rook e8, thinking that I'm controlling the e file, so this must be a good move. But if you do puzzles frequently, then you'll probably be able to spot knight f6 very quickly, and this move actually just wins a rook, so the king is forced to move and then you can just capture that rook. The next tip is to activate your pieces. For example, in this position, even though it's a draw, you could still potentially win if you decide to like activate your pieces. For example, the king is a very important piece. Like if black were to just waste moves and go back and forth and you were to push your pawns, eventually it's actually going to become winning for you. Like in this position, it's already +3 for white just because the king is so active that the knight can now come in. For example, the king can come in, then the knight can come in, and all of a sudden you're winning all these pawns. Like if black just wastes a move, you'll just start capturing, captures, and now because your king is so far advanced, you can take all of black's pieces and promote. This also moves on to the third tip, which is to try and push your pawns, because in this position, the only way you can really win in like this position and a whole majority of positions is by pushing the queen all the way to the end and promoting to a queen. Like in this position, let's say black does like h5 maybe, you would do b4. If they do king g6, then you can do b5. If they start trying to go to like f5 to g4 and then to g3, you can just capture their pawn. King would come down, you push, the king would take, you push, they would start pushing, but because you promote to a queen first, you're actually winning this game. But let's say for example, instead of pushing your pawn, instead you just moved your king to try and win all their pawns. If they start coming down here and they start taking your pawns, even though you've won all their pawns, just the fact that they get a single queen, they'll be able to pick up every single one of these and they'll end up winning the whole game. So when it comes to the end game, you want to try and push your pawns. Now for the bonus tip is to always try and stay calm, cool and collected, because when you're in a bad headspace, you're not always going to play the best moves. You might end up just hanging your queen in a single move or overlooking something very, very simple. So being in a good headspace, I feel like, is the most important thing for chess. Guys, welcome back to my channel, Rafi Chess. Today we're analyzing a game that helped me reach 1500 on chess.com. This game was played live on my stream, which I am on every single day. I'm streaming on TikTok. Hello guys, welcome back to my channel, Rafi Chess. Today we're analyzing the game that broke me through 1500 on chess.com. This game was played live on TikTok. I'll soon also be live on YouTube and Twitch, so stay tuned for that, guys, and let's jump straight into this game. Stay sharp, stay focused, and never stop learning.